All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today's deep dive takes us into influencer privacy in Pakistan. Specifically, we're looking at these articles you sent over about two Pakistani TikTok stars, Imsha Rehman and Minahil Malik.
Yeah.
And it seems like they both got caught up in some, well, pretty intense privacy issues. We're going to try to unpack what happened, why it matters, and what this whole situation says about, I guess, the digital world we're all living in now, right?
I think what's interesting here, these incidents, they're happening in Pakistan, but it feels like they really tap into this kind of universal anxiety we all have.
Oh, yeah.
About our online lives, How much do we share? What happens when stuff that's supposed to be private, suddenly becomes public?
Oh, yeah.
And then, with influencer culture becoming such a global phenomenon, it feels like those questions become even more, I don't know, kind of loaded.
Definitely. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Your articles talk about how both Rehman and Malik, they had these private videos leaked online, explicit videos, and, well, the internet being the internet, the judgment was pretty swift.
Right, and there's this almost automatic assumption, isn't there, that they leaked the videos themselves.
Like as a publicity stunt.
Exactly, for publicity, which honestly is kind of a sad commentary on how cynical we've become about online fame and all that.
Yeah, it's like we assume everyone's just chasing clout, no matter the cost. And it gets even crazier. One of the articles mentioned that people were taking screenshots from Raymond's video and turning them into memes. I mean, can you imagine the level of public humiliation? I don't even know how you process that.
Yeah, it's a really brutal example of how quickly something private can become, like fodder for the internet meme machine. And it's important to remember that there's a human being at the center of all this. There's actual emotional damage that can happen. Both Rehman and Malik actually ended up deactivating their social media accounts, which kind of tells you how intense the backlash was.
There was a quote from Rehman in one of the articles where she says, "The backlash has been overwhelming."
Yeah.
And honestly, reading that just really hit me. It humanizes the whole thing. It's a reminder that there's a real person behind the screen dealing with all this judgment.
For sure. And it's important to remember, too, while there were all these accusations flying around about intentional leaking, some of the articles actually suggest that Rehman might have been the victim of a data breach, which then brings up a whole other set of concerns, right? About online security and stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes you wonder, do you think influencers, because their digital footprint is so much bigger than the average person's, are they more vulnerable to things like data breaches?
That's such a good question. It makes sense, right? I mean, they're constantly online, sharing parts of their lives, connecting with fans. I feel like it would make them prime targets for hackers and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And the more personal information they put out there, the more valuable they become to someone who wants to, exploit that information.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about Minahil Malik's case. Because she responded to this whole thing very differently. She claimed that the video was fake and actually filed a complaint.
Right.
But even then, she still got a lot of criticism.
And what's interesting is where that criticism came from. You sent me this article about this Pakistani actress, Misha Khan, who basically condemned influencers who try to get famous through these kinds of scandals.
Oh, wow.
She even compared it to a scene from a Bollywood film, like it was all calculated to get attention, which makes you wonder, is there this kind of pre-existing narrative, this idea of the fame-hungry influencer that just colors how people perceive everything?
That's crazy. It's wild how quickly one incident can spiral out and become this lightning rod for all these bigger societal judgments about, fame, morality, women's behavior, especially in a context like Pakistan.
Yeah. And it makes you question how much of what we see online is actually genuine, right? And how much of it is manufactured just for clicks and likes.
Honestly, this whole situation is making me think about my own online behavior. What if I'm just one data breach away from having my private life all over the internet? And as someone who consumes all this online content, am I part of the problem? Am I helping to spread these harmful narratives?
That's something we all need to consider. And it really emphasizes the need for us to be more careful, more critical about the information that we're consuming online, the judgments that we're making, and really our role in shaping a digital environment that's more, respectful and safe for everybody.
Yeah.
But let's break that down a little bit more in the next part of our deep dive. Because there were also some really fascinating articles you sent over about the legal side of all this and the cultural implication. It's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
As we sort of dig deeper into these cases, something that really jumps out at me is how they kind of highlight the cultural side of things,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to privacy and public image, particularly in Pakistan.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can't just ignore the cultural context, right? It's got to play a role. So how is this kind of thing generally viewed in Pakistani society?
Well, Pakistan, it's a predominantly Muslim country, right? So there are these strong cultural and religious values that really shape how people behave, like public displays of affection or anything that might be considered, inappropriate. That's usually frowned upon.
So in that context, I imagine leaks like these would be seen as even more scandalous.
Absolutely. And, the fact that both of these women were immediately accused of leaking the videos themselves, I think that really speaks to this tendency to kind of moralize, to judge people, especially when it comes to women and their behavior.
That makes you wonder, would things have played out the same way if this happened somewhere else, in a totally different cultural context?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Because, cultural norms and expectations definitely influence how these situations are perceived and dealt with. It really highlights the need to be sensitive, to try and understand the nuances when we're talking about these issues across different cultures.
It's almost like the internet slams into these real-world cultural fault lines, It's not just about the technology itself, it's how that technology intersects with all these existing social norms and values.
Exactly. And it just emphasizes the need for conversations that are, more nuanced, more respectful, conversations that take all those complexities into account.
Okay, so we've talked about the cultural side of things. We've talked about, the responsibility of these social media platforms and the role that individual users play. But I'm curious, are there any legal protections in place, like laws or regulations to prevent this kind of privacy violation from happening in the first place?
Well, lots of countries, Pakistan included, they do have laws against things like cybercrime, harassment, that sort of thing. But the problem is the internet moves so fast, it's tough to enforce those laws. They can't always keep up.
So it's not just about having the laws on the books, it's about actually being able to apply them in this digital age, right?
Right. And then there's also the issue of awareness. Do people even know about these laws? Do they know what their rights are? Do they know what to do if they become a victim?
It feels like we're constantly playing catch-up when it comes to regulating the online world.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. The technology changes so quickly that it's really hard for those legal and regulatory frameworks to keep pace.
So let's say someone finds themselves in a situation like Rehman or Malik. What advice would you give them?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to remember that you're not alone in this. These experiences can be really isolating, really traumatic. But there are resources out there. Reach out to friends, family, talk to a therapist. Think about reporting the incident to the authorities.
It's such an important reminder. You're not to blame for what happened. And there is help available.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even though it can feel overwhelming at first, there are definitely steps you can take to, regain control and protect your well-being. Focus on taking care of yourself. Surround yourself with people who are supportive, and just take it one day at a time.
That's a good reminder for everyone, really. It's so easy to get caught up in all the negativity. Prioritizing your own mental and emotional health, that's crucial. As we head into the last part of our deep dive, what are some, key takeaways you want our listeners to think about?
I think these incidents, they're like a wake-up call, a reminder that the digital world, while it has all these amazing opportunities for connection and creativity and all that, it also presents these really unique challenges to privacy and to personal safety. And I think we all have a responsibility to be more, aware, more critical, more empathetic, in how we interact online.
It's about recognizing that those choices we make online, those have real consequences for ourselves and for other people. And I think we need to advocate for a digital landscape that's, safer, more inclusive, more respectful of everyone's rights.
Couldn't agree more. It's an ongoing conversation, and I'm really glad we're having it. But there's another layer to all this that I think is really important to explore. You highlighted some articles about how these individual cases, while they're certainly compelling, they actually point to these much larger trends that are happening, trends that are reshaping how we think about privacy in this digital world. Should we dive into that a little bit?
Through all of this, something that's really kind of stuck with me is how fast these stories exploded online. It makes me think about how powerful these narratives can be in the digital world,
Yeah.
and how quickly they can shape public opinion.
It is pretty incredible when you think about it. These incidents, they become these narratives almost instantly. And a lot of times they're fueled by speculation, incomplete information.
Yep.
And then boom, before you know it, they've gone viral.
Yeah.
And that shapes how we see the people involved, but also the bigger issues. Yeah.
It's like we're all caught up in this constant cycle of online narratives, whether we realize it or not. So how can we, be more critical? When we're consuming these stories, are there any warning signs we should be looking out for?
I think one of the biggest red flags is sensationalism.
Yeah.
If a story feels like it's deliberately trying to provoke a reaction, like make you angry or upset or whatever,
Yeah.
take a step back. Think about who's telling the story, what their agenda might be. Is the information being presented responsibly?
It's like that old saying, right? Don't believe everything you read on the internet, especially if it feels like it's trying to get a rise out of you.
Exactly. And another thing to watch out for is, what's it called? Confirmation bias. That's where we tend to gravitate towards information that already aligns with what we believe.
Oh.
Even if it's not totally accurate or the full story, we have to be aware of that bias and really make an effort to seek out different perspectives.
Even the ones we don't agree with.
Especially the ones we don't agree with.
Yeah.
Because they might challenge our assumptions, help us see things in a new light.
So basically, be open to the possibility that we could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And be willing to change our minds when new information comes up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even when we come across viewpoints that we totally disagree with, it's so important to engage with them respectfully. The internet can be such a divided space.
Yeah.
But it's good to remember that there's almost always more than one side to every story.
It's about having those tough conversations, but doing it with empathy, with understanding, and recognizing that even when we disagree, we can still learn from each other.
Absolutely. And I think those same principles apply not just to how we consume narratives, but to how we create them too. If we want a digital world that's more just and fair, we have to be conscious of the stories we're putting out there and, potential impact they can have.
Yeah. It's a powerful thought, right? We're all storytellers now in this digital age. And we have a responsibility to use that power carefully, ethically.
For sure. The choices we make, the stories we share, the conversations we have online, those things can have a ripple effect that we might not even realize.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I think it boils down to this. Be critical, be mindful, and be kind. Approach the digital world with a discerning eye, a sense of responsibility for your actions, and a commitment to empathy. Those are the principles I believe that are essential for navigating the complexities of the digital age, for building an online world that's more humane, more equitable.
I love that. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. When you're scrolling through your feeds, when you're having those online discussions, when you're consuming content, remember that there are real people on the other side of the screen. People with their own stories, their own emotions, their own vulnerabilities. Just like you, let's try to create a digital world that reflects the best of humanity. A world where empathy, respect, and critical thinking are the guiding principles in our interactions, in the stories we tell.
Well said. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.